Welcome, welcome. I am so pleased to see that so many people are attending our January census updates. This is getting to be a monthly thing, and we're glad you're always with us. I want to say that about a year ago, I was telling my adult daughters how exciting the census was, and they gave me the rolled eye thing. And they just were having none of this. And like, Mom, there's a lot of other things we could spend our time thinking about, and it's not going to be the census. Well, now I want you to know every time I get on the phone with them, they say, hey, what's the latest on the census? So we are here to answer that question. And we have Kathleen Stiles, who is with the Census Bureau. She's the Chief Decennial Communications and Stakeholder Relations person. And you might think of her as working with James Whitehorn, who most of the people on this call know very well. So we're really thrilled, Kathleen, that you're with us today. And we'll kick it off with you in a moment. And we also have Elizabeth Garner, and she is Colorado's state demographer. And you all might not know that there is a state demographer in every state, and you might like to get to know yours. I think many of them have been paying very close attention to the processes of the census, how it will be used in many areas, including redistricting and data quality questions that might be coming up this year. Okay, so I am under the impression that we have some fairly big news. So Kathleen, I'm going to just hand it off to you, and don't keep us waiting, please.
Okay, and if we can go ahead and get my slides up, Christy, and we can get started, because the news I was going to talk about doesn't show up till slide number 21. And I have other things to talk about, but the big news that Wendy was talking about earlier is that the Census Bureau has been working on a date by which it would produce the apportionment numbers, not the redistricting. I'm not going to be able to give you a date certain for redistricting yet, but we do have a date certain for apportionment now. This is a schedule. It is no longer a statement of as soon as close as possible to, or any of the other ways that we've expressed this. And that date is April 30th. We will be releasing apportionment numbers before April 30th. So there's a long story for how we got there. And a lot of it, most of it has to do with COVID and the unprecedented pandemic that we have in our country. So with that, if we can move on to the next slide. And I'll sort of walk you through what I'm going to tell you about today. I want to give you an update on census operations. I want to talk to you about post-processing and anomalies. And anomalies are simply issues that we find in the data as we go through our data review. I'm going to talk about our current focus on data quality. Then we're going to talk about when can you see the numbers. I'll give you a very brief CVAP update. That is a CVAP update in light of the new administration and the new executive order. A very brief disclosure avoidance update, and a very brief outline of a topic I think you've heard about in more detail, which is count question resolution. And then my big goal after we hear from Elizabeth and other uses for census data is to take questions from you. Next slide. There you go. This is a slide you all have probably seen many times, and it is the various stages of the census, from establishing our address list, our frame, to motivating people to self-response. And I just wanted to point it out, to use this to point out that the self-response phase, which is the third little block on the left, that's where COVID-19 hit us. And everything that has happened from 10 o'clock up to the present time, up to 3 o'clock, has been, as we say, under the influence of the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide. So COVID-19, March 18th, we did our first shutdown in the field, where we pulled back our staff. We had begun self-response earlier in March. We had begun the delivering of questionnaires for the update leave operation. And we were forced to pull people away. We did not let anyone go because we knew we would be getting them back as soon as possible. But that is March 18th, at the very, very beginning of the census, is when COVID-19 began to hit us first. We had a really significant hurricane season this year, and the various hurricanes are listed here. These were devastating to the Gulf Coast in the United States in particular, and really complicated operations during the time we were out doing our non-response follow-up operation. One of the joys and benefits of the census season you know, pre-COVID is that you get your field work done before you hit hurricane season. We were not able to avoid hurricane season. We had a briefing from NOAA well prior to hurricane season, and they said it's going to be a really bad one, and they were right. We had a real crisis with our western states, with California, Oregon, and Washington, with fires and air quality. For those of us who have friends and family on the West Coast, this was really a very difficult time. It was unhealthy for people to be outdoors for large periods of time in the western states. What we're calling here euphemistically civil unrest. This is, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement and people protesting in the streets at the time that we're out trying to do some of our operations. And then, of course, we have had a multiplicity of legal challenges, including legal challenges that affected the enumeration itself and the progress of the enumeration. Next slide. So this is what our prior operational timelines were. And I say prior because this is no longer the case. You know, what we were saying once we moved into the replan period, the period after August 3rd, was that we would be getting out the apportionment data as close to the statutory deadline as possible. And we really stuck with that line because, you know, the direction was pedal to the metal, and that's how we were working. So as you can see, for every one of these operations, they were being handled substantially later than originally planned. And if we can move to the next slide. We had to make major alterations in our communications campaign because of COVID-19. You know, one of the real pillars of Census Response is our local partnership program. And we had to do that in the new environment of social distancing. And remember too, when COVID first began, we didn't know a whole lot about social distancing and how that would work and how people would react and, you know, really how to, you know, minimize risk. And so a lot of events were simply canceled, and we depend very heavily on, you know, local communications activities. The media focus during COVID-19 did change. It was all news all the time, all COVID all the time, and the kind of prior excitement and earned media that we were able to earn simply evaporated. This created also problems with how we synchronized our communications campaign with our enumeration campaign. For example, we had already prepaid spots for advertising in the field saying, respond now. And it was at a time that numerous households in update leave areas, for example, didn't have a questionnaire. They didn't have an ID. So the only types of responses that we could get were non-ID responses. And in some areas, that's fine. But in areas, for example, like Puerto Rico, where our address list is not of the same quality, a large percentage of non-ID responses doesn't actually help because you still need to go out to the field to verify them. So we bought a whole lot more advertising. We did not go dark during the summer months. Rather, we kept some presence. We moved more into a digital market. And then we recommenced advertising with new messaging as we got closer to the non-response follow-up operation. Next slide. So operational adjustments. Of course, our first priority was to take care of our enumerators and the American public. And, you know, of course, also to do so in a way that resulted in a complete and an accurate enumeration of local communities. We did this by doing a phased restart. The first thing that we implemented was resuming update leave operation. And we resumed that in a modified fashion that involves simply leaving materials at someone's doorstep on their doorknob without actually interacting with the resident at the house. Then we reopened our area census offices, reopened our paper data capture centers, and then began fingerprinting and onboarding the staff to start the non-response operation. And we began it in what we called a series of soft launches. In a typical census, we would do a soft launch for, 8 or 10 ACOs, a small number of ACOs, sort of get the bugs out in the first week and then open for everybody the following week. And instead, what we were doing throughout July was opening every week for the ACOs that we were using the data getting information that they were safe from a COVID-19 perspective until we opened in all ACOs on August 3rd. Next slide. So our self-response metrics, I think you've seen a lot of these next 3 slides. I'm going to talk about self-response and non-response and some of our other operations. The self-response went very well. We were very pleased with it. We did not have any downtime on our online instrument. The online instrument was up much, much, much longer than we had ever anticipated, and yet we still did not have any downtime with it. Our final self-response rate was 67%. That exceeded the 2010 self-response rate, but it's not really a difference that we brag about because we had so much longer of a self-response period in 2020, given the COVID-19. The vast majority of responses came in via internet. That was absolutely the preferred mode for majority of people. We were surprised at the low number of people who wanted to use our phone services, and the paper came in at about what we expected at 18%. Next slide, please. So for our non-response follow-up metrics, our non-response follow-up workload was in the neighborhood that we were expecting, 60.8 million housing units. During the time that we were in our non-response follow-up operation, we received an additional 6.3 million self-responses, primarily via the internet. Of the housing units that were occupied, the 30 million occupied housing units that were enumerated, 55% of those, or 56, were enumerated from the householder, roughly 24% via proxy, and roughly 20% via administrative records. So we don't have final numbers on any of this yet, because as I'll explain, and we'll talk about post-processing in a minute, these are all preliminary numbers. But the proxy rate appears to be similar to the proxy rate from the 2010 census. The preliminary response rate should go down, or preliminary proxy rate should go down after we finish doing our matching and unduplication. The enumeration via administrative records, the 6.3 million housing units that we enumerated that way, that's actually less than we anticipated and less than we had planned for. Enumeration via administrative records was always a part of the census. It was one of our early design innovations. We started planning for this back in 2015 or something like that. And we actually got fewer enumerations via administrative records. Our productivity was higher than we had estimated. It was higher than our plan, but certainly within the realm of the expected at 1.92 cases per hour. And productivity typically, starts sky high as we're in the early cases and sort of dwindles as the operation goes along, and enumerators are enumerating the more difficult households. Next slide. So there are a host of other operations. In the desire to do a complete and accurate enumeration, we have to enumerate in remote Alaska. We do areas that are in the update leave operation with generally different addressing conventions. We enumerate in group quarters. We enumerate service-based enumeration. It's quite an operation, and those operations generally went as planned, though there was certainly a COVID effect for each and every one of these operations. We were able to recruit over 3.9 million applicants and hired somewhere and had working somewhere over 300,000 of them. Numerous partners supported us throughout this, both the national and community partners. Next slide. So we're going across the census, looking at the different operations. We have now done everything up to the very final circle over at the 3 o'clock, and that is to tabulate our census data and release our census results. That is the part of the process that we are in right now. Next slide. So post-processing, it's what we call the phase after we finish our data collection. You've got to scan and key the paper forms, you update the MAF-Tiger database, we deliver the final responses in all modes and all operations and synchronize them. And we create a master address file extract, which is how we create our final geography. Next slide. Yeah, then the next major file that we produce, the slide we were just talking about involves creating what we call the DRF1, the decennial response file 1. What we are doing right now is creating the decennial response file 2, the DRF2. And this is where we remove responses that don't meet the criteria for responses. And that, for example, if somebody files a census response for their child and the child was born on May 1st, 2020, we would remove the child from the census. We're happy that they were reported. We're happy they're born, but they don't belong in the census. They don't meet our criteria. We execute the primary selection algorithm. And this is our very secret, not public algorithm that we use to resolve situations where we have more than one response for a single address or 2 or more responses for the same household. And given that we had a multiplicity of response modes this census, we certainly are expecting and are in the process of resolving the primary selection algorithm. And the DRF2 is a national file. Next slide. After the DRF2, we produce what we call the CUF, the Census Unedited file. And that includes the final population count for each address. The primary operation that happens here is that for unresolved addresses, we use a method called count imputation to fill in the missing value for the house or the housing unit. And this is something that will happen to likely fewer than 1% of the housing units in the nation. And if we have a housing unit that after the conclusion of all of our best efforts in our field operation, we are not able to determine whether the housing unit's occupied or how many people live there, or even if it exists, we use this method called imputation. We have been using this for the last several censuses. We consider that it improves the accuracy of the census because it does not erroneously include a value of 0 where we know there's something going on with the house. We just don't know the details about what's going on with the house. So that the imputation is what happens during the CUF. Next slide. At each and every step of this process and the subsequent steps that happen to produce the redistricting data file, we have subject matter review of the files. And this is where we are looking for data processing errors. We are trying to verify that the edits and the processing steps were properly applied. The subject matter experts primarily, but not wholly, in our population division, our demographic directorate, they look at item non-response rates, missing rates, population count only responses. They look at proxies. They look at all possible data quality issues. They evaluate the reasonableness of what they are seeing by comparing to other evidence, other indicia that we have of the same population. For example, they would compare to 2020 census numbers, to ACS data, to population estimates. This is really key for us in helping us identify errors. And I don't even want to call them errors. The decennial census is something that happens once every 10 years, and no matter how well we test our systems, as we go through and do the actual data processing at the end, it is simply inevitable that we're going to find something where we needed to go back and get the knot out so that the system can run properly thereafter. Next slide. So anomalies. Every census has anomalies, every single census. The 2020 census is no different. You have probably been reading in the newspaper or on Twitter about the anomalies that we have been finding. We find it comforting that we are finding anomalies. Finding anomalies means that our data quality process is working. We don't consider them errors. We consider them errors if we don't resolve them. The 4 categories of anomalies are the standard ones: problems that arise in processing any large survey, those that result from unanticipated respondent actions or unanticipated enumerator actions, or simply our fix when we fixed the anomaly didn't work and we need to rerun it. The kinds of anomalies that we're finding are exactly what we have expected to find. For example, one that we talk about some is in some of our group quarters, when our analysts, our subject matter experts went in and looked at the data, they noticed that there were group quarters, prisons, college dormitories, et cetera, where the population count was 0. And we had no reason to believe the population count was in fact 0. And most of these turned out to be situations where the facility had reported all of the population for that facility in one subgroup of the facility, in one dorm, for example. And in fact, the population needed to be spread out across different dorms, different blocks, different facilities. And that sort of misreporting needs to be corrected. And we actually went back and engaged with our field staff and did a very quick 1-week operation to call some of these facilities to get clarification from them on where the population belonged, and then reprocess that data. This is the exact sort of thing that happens in every census, and finding these anomalies is not evidence to us of lack of quality in the census. Next slide. So what I want you to take away from this slide is that we are going to fix anomalies. All anomalies that affect apportionment or redistricting data will be corrected. We track them, we assess them, and we go through a rigorous development and testing project prior to implementing the correction. And then if it doesn't work, we go back and we do it again. The subject matter experts validate the anomaly corrective actions, and the final bullet, if we identify subsequent anomalies, and we will correct them. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit about the focus on accuracy and providing accurate data. It's crucial to the Census Bureau. We consider ourselves bound by statistical policy directives 1 and 4, by the Purple Book, the Principles and Practices for Federal Statistical Agencies, and it's our constitutionally mandated mission. Very small differences between states can affect apportionment, as the second bullet here shows. 857 persons shifted a seat in the 2020 census. So we are committed to ensuring the accuracy and the quality of our count. I was hoping that we would have published by the time I spoke this afternoon the first of a series of blogs that we are going to be putting out, where we talk in more detail about data quality, about anomalies, about what we're finding as we look at the data. The first blog is not yet out, but I will leave you with anticipation, waiting to see that. The first one will be from our acting director, Ron Jarman. Ron is a career federal civil servant, as am I, and the rest of the Census Bureau staff at this point. Ron chartered back in May, a data quality executive guidance group. We have lots of eggs, as we call them in the Census Bureau. And the data quality egg is charged with overseeing and verifying the quality of resulting census products. We have a real rigorous process for review. It's a very disciplined process. And that group is looking at operational data collection metrics. And they will look at the post-enumeration survey, and they have been looking at demographic analysis. What they also have is a plan for some real unprecedented transparency in this process. In prior censuses, without COVID, without allegations of political interference, without litigation, we published our apportionment numbers, and then we would publish our redistricting numbers, and then 6 months or a year later, we'd start publishing operational assessments and evaluations. We can't do that this time. We really need to get the message across that, quality is, I hate to say quality is job one, because I think that's somebody's slogan, but that quality is really our cornerstone right now. We need to be, educating people on the accuracy and the quality of the numbers that we're putting out. So we will be releasing data quality metrics along with the apportionment numbers. And then prior to release of the redistricting numbers, we will be producing additional data quality metrics about the quality of the redistricting numbers. So I am a career civil servant. I'm not a political appointee, but I did watch the news yesterday, and I saw our Secretary of Commerce nominee testifying for her nomination. And she testified that she will do all she can to rebuild people's trust in the census. She stated, "I believe that we need to take the politics out of the census and we need to rely on the experts." Here's the part I like. "The experts and statisticians in the Census Bureau are top notch, so I, once confirmed, intend to rely on them." She says she intends to follow the lead of statisticians and other experts at the Census Bureau, and that if they advise more time is needed to review the census data before their release. Next slide. So the operational metrics that we will be releasing along with apportionment and redistricting data are primarily operational metrics. They are metrics that show how well we did our field data collection operations. To truly measure the quality of the census, to measure overcounts and undercounts, we're going to need the results of the post-enumeration survey. Those of you who don't know it, this is a separate operation. It's going on right now. We still have field work happening to happen in the post-enumeration survey, and the results from the PES will not be available until at the earliest November of this year, and results will continue to be released through February of 22. We also released results from demographic analysis. Next slide. And those results tell us more generally that the population as of April 1st of last year is somewhere between 330,730,000 and 335,514,000. So this number is important to us, this and the components of this number, because they are benchmarks that we use in looking at the accuracy of the numbers that we have been seeing. Next slide. So this is the slide about our change in our processing deadline. So the first column here, the first set of columns is the original plan. This is pre-COVID. This is our statutory deadlines. This is what the Census Bureau thought it was going to do. Up until March of 2020, this is what we were doing. We had a plan. We were going to meet it. We've never missed a deadline yet. We were ready to go on this one. COVID happened, and we were not able to get in the field, and we knew things would have to change. And we, in conjunction with the Department of Commerce and the White House, put forward what we called the COVID plan. And there were various bills that were introduced in Congress to add more time to the schedule. So under the COVID plan, the various bills that were submitted, apportionment would have been released by April 30th and redistricting by July 30th. In the final row of this for delivery redistricting, under both the original and the COVID plan, we had planned to continue our traditional process of delivering the redistricting numbers on a flow basis over approximately a 6-week period, with the states that needed their data earlier receiving it earlier, and the other states sort of spread out over time. This had the advantage of letting early states get data earlier and sort of spread out our data review. If you'll note in the final far bottom right blocks, we have left blank both the start and the finish in there. James has mentioned to you already, we are currently evaluating the possibility that we can reduce risk and get numbers out faster by doing one national delivery that would include all the data for all of the states. So that decision hasn't been made, but it is certainly our recommendation that we reduced risk by having one delivery there. The big number here, or date, that you're seeing is April 30th for release of the apportionment counts. You have, if you follow Twitter and the census news in detail, will have seen dates in early March for release of the census data prior to this. And this April 30th schedule reflects the Census Bureau going back in and producing a realistic schedule rather than what we call a happy path schedule. So the schedules of we're going to release as fast as we can, as close to the date as possible, were what we call a happy path schedule. They were schedules that were not taking into account what we expect to find when we do data processing, which is anomalies that need to be corrected. We have found anomalies. We will likely find more anomalies, and we will fix additional anomalies as we find them. We don't have a final date yet. I cannot say, looking at this, that, and I would like to sort of plant a bug in your ear, not to assume that you will be able to get redistricting data by July 30th. And I say that simply because the processing decisions that were made during the replan period prioritized apportionment numbers over redistricting numbers.
I swear.
I'm sorry. All right, I'll go on. So, we are in the process of doing a detailed schedule scrub right now. James Whitehorn in my office is working on that actively. And we hope to have a date in the near future that we can provide for when the redistricting data will come out. It will not be, I cannot see that it would be before July 30th is how I would put this. Next slide. Wendy had asked for an update on CVAP. I think we have issued a press release on this. We have suspended production of the post-2020 CVAP that was pursuant to the executive order from the Trump administration. We, as we have always planned, will be releasing actually next Monday the CVAP that uses the ACS 5-year estimates. So that is due for release on February 1st. What we will produce in the future in terms of CVAP is up in the air. We will consult with our colleagues in the Department of Justice on their needs, and we will consult with others on what use cases are out there for the citizenship data that we now have. But work has been suspended on this. Next slide. Brief disclosure avoidance update. I know James has updated you on this not too long ago. The DAS team is still continuing experimental runs. We have been producing, I think, more and more acceptable numbers as they continue these experimental runs. We do not plan to issue another set of demonstration data, but rather for the DCEP committee to set the final privacy loss budget in the relatively near future, at which point we will release a final set of demonstration data. And then as soon as practical thereafter, the production code base will be released for the PL data. And next. Count question resolution. I think James had briefed you on this as well. This is where we review requests for correction to the 2020 counts. And the request has to come from the highest elected official of the governmental unit or the tribal chairman. We do not review new data in the field. It's not the same as a special census. And neither the apportionment counts nor the redistricting data nor the characteristic files are corrected as a result of the count question resolution program. It is used, however, to apply to the inner census population estimates starting in 2022. So this program will be starting this fall on October 1st. Next slide. So the workflow for the CQR is, the states and tribes and data users, the governmental units review the published results. And if they suspect errors, they can file a CQR case. We review the case. The cases are sent to the geography division for research and resolution. They may be processing errors. And if there are no changes made, the case is closed. If processing changes or errors are found, we resolve them and we retabulate the count for all governments that are affected by the CQR case. And we provide the updated counts to the highest level affected official of the impacted government, and we post the errata on the 2020 CQR website. Next and final slide is simply time for questions, or perhaps time to talk to Elizabeth for a minute and then get to questions. Your call, but I am looking forward to hearing Elizabeth.
Kathleen, I am also looking forward to hearing Elizabeth, and I think everyone else is too. But I do want to ask you to clarify some things. The chat is all about specificity on these deadlines. I know you've told us April 30th. The question is, will it come on April 30th or by April 30th?
By April 30th.
Thank you. And the next question is, we know that we should not be expecting the redistricting data by July 30th. We've got the question, can we keep going with the idea that it'll likely be with us by September, for instance? Could we get it in August or September?
But we'll have the answer for you on that very shortly, and we're trying to make the shortest period that is consistent with high quality data.
All right, and we have people who point out that they have statutory and constitutional issues, and I know you know this, and I know James knows it, so we appreciate your help on that. I think those are the key dates. We'll come back and clean up all of the questions, but let's at this point move over to Elizabeth. Are you there, and can you pop up your slides? And thank you, Kathleen. I know that was a lot you provided for us, and very clear, with the exception of those pieces I wanted to double down on.
Thank you.
Perfect. So first, just want a quick check that you can see the slides and you can hear me.
You look good, and we see the slides just great.
Perfect, great. Well, thank you. And I'm not actually going to take a ton of time because I think actually a lot of people have more questions for Kathleen. There was a lot of great information here, but I know you all are very excited about the redistricting, as are we, but we also know that there's a lot of other stuff that comes with the census data. And you know, we talk a lot about the reapportionment and redistricting. We talk a lot about the federal fund allocation, but I can tell you for state demographers across the country, this is Christmas. Okay, we get the new best data at the small levels of geography that we use for program planning, understand who we currently are, looking at trends, program evaluation, everything that you can imagine. So as you know, a little disappointment with the whole COVID thing and the delay, because this is delaying Christmas for us. But I think it's really important to understand that there's so much more going on with the census data than just the redistricting. And I don't mean to say just the redistricting, because I know that is hugely important. In terms of understanding who we currently are, I think is critical in understanding that total population by age, race, ethnicity, understanding total number of housing units, because so much has changed from 2010 through 2020. And this is just one example for you, is that, for example, with COVID, we know that there's been a lot of impact to lower income workers that have been laid off or lost their jobs. A lot of them tend to be renters. And so we've had this moratorium on evictions. Well, it's been a key thing in Colorado, and I'm sure it's going on across the country, is identifying where are areas of the state that are likely to have more renters so that we can do more outreach, do better outreach to these areas. And so this is, for example, just a map showing by track where we've got higher concentration of renters. And so like this is something that we produced for the governor's office and working with our housing division in terms of understanding different outreach components. Understanding vital stats. So we need to know the denominator for everything. So if you wanted to be able to look at birth rates, we actually need to know how many total women of childbearing age there are to create birth rates. Same with death rates. And then especially in terms of COVID, understanding death rates by age, by race and ethnicity to really try and look at impacts. Looking at trends from over a time period, like how have birth rates changed from 2010 through 2020. Looking at incidence of disease, again, we need this denominator. You know, how is heart disease changing? How is diabetes changing? Again, by race and ethnicity. Likewise, you know, just simply for emergency management, and you know, COVID is such a great, you know, explanation for the need for so many things. And this For example, just even recently, this last week, we were creating maps by track and actually block group, but this just shows track of where the folks over the age of 65, lower income people of color live in Colorado so that we can target outreach for vaccinations. And this is not just obviously happening in Colorado, this is happening across the country. And that's why this good data and information that's coming out is vital for everything that we do throughout the country. Obviously, program planning, so understanding where you're supposed to be delivering services is key. And age for me is my most favorite variable that comes out of all of the census data because everybody changes their preferences based on age. How you participate in school, in the labor force, what kind of housing you're looking for, what kind of service demand you might have, as well as how much money you make, so you know what kind of an economic driver you can anticipate on seeing. And so this is a map of a chart of Colorado's single year of age, broken down by color for the different generations. It's single year of age, and you can see a lot from just a simple chart like this, that then again is dependent on this data that's coming out from Census. The black line is where 65 is. And so you can see very few people over the age of 65, a lot of people younger than 65, aging into that 65 plus. So knowing that we're going to have a demand for services in the 65 plus over this next decade. Our peak person is 29. We've got a slower growth at the younger end. So there's so much stuff that you can see from this. And this, again, you can understand why this is Christmas for demographers like myself. We can also look at it in terms of program planning. So this is a map of the US. The pink shaded states are those that have a decline in the under 18 population between 2010 and 2019. The green colored states are those that are having an increase in the under 18. So much program planning can come from a map. Just looking at this is when we see this decline in the Midwest and the Northeast. So we know that they're doing program planning differently for K-12 education, probably higher ed as well. Certainly in Colorado, we're thinking, all right, if this is happening in the Northeast and the Midwest, when will it occur in Colorado? So again, we can do program planning. Likewise, if any of you have kids that are in college age, you may be seeing that they're getting a hard press to go to schools in the Midwest and the Northeast because they've seen this decline in the under 18 population. They're looking at getting more kids in school. Certainly both of my kids were lured out of Colorado to other states to go to school because they could actually get a better deal, pay less tuition for as good an education somewhere else because they're willing to give them that ticket in. A lot of times that also leads then to economic development. If you attract them when they're young, they're likely to stay. So there's a lot of program planning that can go on from information like this. We can also plan for services. So if we look at just our forecast, we know if we know who a single year of age, we can then age people forward. People just age a single year at a time, so we can age them forward. So we can see in this just forecast for Colorado between 2010 and 2020 that our fastest growth we're expecting in the 65 plus. And that's important for program planning. We can look at very little growth in the 0 to 17 and the 18 to 24. So this might mean something to K-12 as well as higher ed. So again, this is how demographers and other programs use this data that's going to be coming out. It's also our base for the next 10 years. So we start with the 2020 count, and then we'll add births, subtract deaths, look at net migration, and that then becomes our population estimate for 2021. For the state, for counties, municipalities, districts, we'll use this same information for total number of housing units plus building permits. Critical for household size, information and household type that we'll be using, because this will then become our forecast or our estimate for the next year. If household size is 1 and you've got 10,000 housing units, then you've got 10,000 people. If you've got a household size of 2, then 10,000 units, then you've got 20,000 people. So important to be looking at that household size component that's going to be coming out. And so why we're so cautious with differential privacy and how that's impacting the data, because one of the things that hadn't worked out yet is a good household size number that's reasonable. Service demand is the ultimate need for all of this data, planning for water, emergency services, transportation, education, all of those different things that state governments, local governments provide. Likewise, businesses use this all the time, every day, and I can't tell you how many business questions I answer weekly with census data, anything from the labor force to understanding where people are for goods and service demands, looking at transportation, logistics, as well as just the things that we use every day. Unemployment rates, labor force participation rates are all fundamentally based on these census counts. Program evaluation, key for how we're spending all of these dollars, whether they're federal or state or local. How did these models perform? And so we did a forecast from 2010 to see what our population would be in 2020. We're going to evaluate that. You know, how did we do? Did we get the totals right? Location, age, race, ethnicity, sex. How can we then tweak that to make the forecast for the next 10 years even better? How did our annual estimates perform? And then did the program work or not? You know, we care about how we do our demographics, but then, you know, there's other programs. For example, there's a program that's national looking at how can we decrease teen pregnancies. Well, if you don't have good data by single year of age, by race, by gender, by sex, how can you even evaluate something like this? And so this is a national program that started back in 2007. And so what we can do is see from this is this huge decline in pregnancies, especially under the age of 30, but definitely teen pregnancies. So we can evaluate, did this program to decrease teen pregnancy work or not? But again, unless you have that base data that the Census Bureau provides, there's no program evaluation potential either. Last and not least, we use it for then our forecast for the next decade. We start and we use, in Colorado, we have a demographic and an economic model. We need to understand both based a lot on census data. And we plan that out, and we're forecasting out to 2050. And this is for big transportation plans, water, other infrastructure, and all state agencies use it. And so this is just an example. So we've got single year of age by decade out to 2050. And this will then show us, okay, you know, maybe not as much at the young end. We've definitely got the aging piece. What do we need to be looking at in our state for this program planning out the line, big picture and everything else? So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we can look at any questions, but thanks for looking at other things besides just redistricting.
Elizabeth, that was so fabulous, because we do get into our own little tunnel, and for you to be able to open up our thinking to how else the census supports the states is just great. And many of us who work with the legislators, we know, of course, that there's not just the redistricting, but they use that information for their policy making all along the way. And it is so critical to the amount of funding they get from the federal government. Now my cat is joining us here. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so I do have a lot of good questions here. Kathleen, get prepared. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
The first one is not so much a question as it is something Doug Johnson said, and I think the rest of us can all sign on for it. He said, "Thank you, Kathleen. The delays are obviously disappointing, but I appreciate you doing the tough job of being the messenger on all of this. Best of luck to you and the whole team working through all of this." So let's all double down on that. Now we get to the hard stuff.
You were buttering me up, and now comes the hard ones.
Exactly. So Joe asked, we know that anomalies are part of the usual process. Got that. Does the 4-month delay in the apportionment data indicate a more significant difficulty in resolving these anomalies than you might have faced in previous years?
I'm not the best person to answer that, but I think the answer is no. I think the answer is, you know, it is us building back in reasonable timeframes for review and correction. And it is also the lingering effects of the design changes that we made and how we sequenced our operations when we were as they say, prioritizing the apportionment delay.
That's kind of what I thought from what you were saying, that it's within tolerance, it's fairly normal. That does, though, beg the question about differential privacy, which is a little bit different than those anomalies. Has differential privacy added to the post-collection processing?
No.
Great, great. Well, we had a question from Kim Brace asking about whether you need to go to Congress to get them to approve the extension. Yeah, I'm seeing a nod there.
I mean, I see discussed various congressmen. I think Senator Schatz, Congressman Schatz I forget, I apologize.
You're right, it's Senator.
The senator is talking about doing this. And, you know, I think we have heard this from others as well. You know, when you have a change of presidential administration, it takes a while to get people into roles and agencies where those sorts of legislative priorities can be pursued. But I think this is very much on Congress's mind, is I guess how I would put it.
All right. And someone else had said to me recently that there wasn't any penalty for missing the apportionment date. So maybe there's not a penalty here otherwise. Just for you to be on the same page with Congress, I think is what we're asking there. And then we had the question about whether you know if the Census Bureau will pursue a permanent statutory deadline change. So here you've got the December 31st and the April 1st deadlines. Do you think that you might want to change those permanently to give you a little more flexibility in the future? And I know I'm asking you to speculate there.
I will speculate, but I'm pretty sure the answer is no.
Okay, great. And then Karen asked, and you might need to look at your slide 18 to answer this, on which unit of analysis will the census commit to accuracy? So if you can remind yourself what that is, and then we'll get that answer.
I think the answer is probably going to be it depends, because yeah. And I don't have a detailed answer for you on that one. You know, the kind of accuracy that you need for apportionment is different than that you need for redistricting. And, you know, it's a discussion we've been having very much with the differential privacy, and where is it that you need your accuracy, and what are the values you need accuracy in. So, you know, I don't think there is a really precise answer on that. And, but we're going to be releasing a whole lot more information about that, you know, in the weeks to come.
All right. And Karen Narasaki has this suggestion for you. Unless the dates for redistrict data are coming very, very, very soon, it would be helpful for the Bureau to update what they've got in terms of deadlines on your webpage. We keep going to look, and it's the same thing. So just heads up for your comms people.
Thank you, Karen.
All right. And Tricia asks, what is the smallest level of geography for which the information regarding data quality will be released? So you talked to us sort of about the 2/3 point about data quality, and will that be checking the data quality right down to the census block level?
So I'm not sure exactly what we're planning to release. I know that we have released information down to the ACO level, which I believe is up in our FOIA reading room. And if it's not, we'll get it back up there. You know, I think the information is going to be released at the, you know, rolled up to some degree. I mean, we would look at the lower levels and it would be rolled up, but I don't have a precise answer for you.
Okay. And then from a couple of days ago, we had the question of when you do a count question resolution. I see that you make the errata on the redistricting data, but people have already redistricted with it. They don't go back and change the redistricting. Is it also true, but is it true that those resolutions are used then for the federal funding? So it's very important to continue to use those so that your federal funding is correctly allocated. Great. Great.
Yeah, they are used for the intercensal population estimates. And, you know, it's a complicated answer, but I think the population estimates are the basis of most federal funding programs.
Great.
It
And Ben, I'm going to
program by program.
Good. Ben, I'm going to come to you next in just a moment. Jeff wrote about some of the things that states can do in regard to their constitutional and statutory deadlines, and Ryan doubled down on that. So could you pop on and give us a real quick review and tell everyone that you'll have something up on the blog in no time?
Sure. So for those of you who don't know, Ben Williams, I work with Wendy on the elections and redistricting team here at NCSL. Kathleen and Elizabeth, thanks for coming on today. This was a great conversation. So Wendy and I have been looking into for some time, what are the options for states that have hard redistricting deadlines either in their statutes or in their constitutions. And obviously the situation varies state to state, but we've sort of created 5 buckets of different options that states may consider if they're looking at this issue. So the first one is what Jeff referenced in the chat, which is asking courts for relief. I believe California did this in 2020, where they asked their state Supreme Court for a cycle, so just this redistricting cycle, bailout from their redistricting deadlines to accommodate for delays in the receipt of census data. That was granted. Another option is if you still have time to pass new laws or amend your constitution to alter or amend the redistricting deadline either permanently or just for this cycle. I don't know how plausible that is for the states that have constitutional deadlines. It may be too late, but if you have a statutory redistricting deadline, that is in theory still possible. A third option is altering the filing deadlines or primary election dates. I think this probably applies most of the states that have elections this fall for legislative offices. Again, unclear about whether or not that is something that you'll be able to do, but it is one of the options that we've been seeing. The other is to turn redistricting into a 2-step process. So and the way this would work in theory is that a state would redistrict using some other data set, either some estimate data from the Census Bureau or 2010 data from the Census Bureau to redistrict as best they could, and then to comply with their deadlines and their constitutions or statutes with the statement that they would reconcile the lines that they've just drawn with the new data in the PL files once it's received by the state. So that wouldn't be the final iteration, but it's just to comply with the deadline, and then they would make amendments to bring themselves in compliance with one person, one vote. And then the last option is to pass a statutory backup mechanism for the redistricting process. So that could be some other backup entity or backup subgroup within the legislature or backup commission that would fall after a statutory or constitutional deadline. I know that Indiana has a backup commission in statute for their congressional district. So this is something that exists. And courts tend to have deference to legislatures when they're trying to comply with constitutional requirements. And so passing this may be something that courts would look favorably on, although I'm not making any legal projections on how everything would shake out. But this is one of the 5 options that Wendy and I have seen in our surveying of the landscape.
Thank you, Ben. And what that says to you all is that we've been thinking about this. You've been thinking about it. You've been in touch with us. The idea of that 2-step was brand new to us, but now we've heard that at least 2 states might be thinking about that. It is basically time to close, but if everyone can stay on for 5 minutes more, we've got a couple of other good questions. And one comes from Utah, and the question is, has any other state considered using population estimates to until such time as they've got the official data? So if you've got something on that, do put it in the chat if your state's thinking about it, if you think your state might want to think about it, if you wish that your state would think about it, and what would it be? I can't think of any other data sets besides the ACS. And then Kathleen, here's a question for you. Kathleen mentioned the Bureau has suspended production of CVAP post-2020. Can you clarify if the block level CVAP corresponding with the 2020 census will be released, and if it will be on a parallel timeline with the 94-171. My interpretation of that is that until the administration changed, there was the expectation that the PL 94-171 would be delivered as always, and at the very same time, the citizenship data based on administrative records would be produced. I think you're saying that's not going to be produced at all, so it wouldn't be produced with the 94-171, or later, either one, that if people want to look at citizenship, they need to look at the work that comes out of the ACS surveys. Have I got that right? Do you want to share anything further on that?
I think what we have been instructed is not to release the block level administrative data, CVAP, with the PL data, this summer or fall. Whether there is a desire in the voting rights section that we produce a amped up CVAP file in the future with more information than is in the ACS product is an open question. And, you know, I think an open question generally, what value the data has, period.
And when you speak of the civil rights section, you're not thinking of James's group, you're thinking of over at the Department of Justice?
Correct.
Okay, right. So then they may get it later for enforcement reasons, but it won't be provided in a way that redistrictors can use it in any way, shape, or form during the process.
Well, it won't be provided in a time frame that it could be used that way.
Okay.
We will be focusing on the PL data.
Okay.
Exclusively.
All right. So could you give us, Kathleen, one more time the headline? You did it earlier, but I see that there is, let's just say it one more time. So it's your voice. When will we be getting apportionment data?
By April 30th.
By April 30th. When will we be getting PL 94-171 data?
We are currently working on a schedule to see how soon we can provide it to you. I hope that James or I or the Bureau can update you in the relatively near future. You should not expect it prior to July 30th.
Okay, and I got to push one more time. I'm being asked to say, is there any way you can give us no later than date? Is there a December 31st no later than date? Anything you can offer on that side?
There's not. This is a subject of vigorous internal debate right now, and I think it's really important that the debate happen and that we really discuss, you know, how we get to our primary goal, which is to be able to deliver accurate data. You know, COVID-19 happened. This was not anybody's idea that we would be delivering data this week. But at this point, that's just a wonderful cat, by the way.
He knows when I'm busy. He knows.
But at this point, I mean, I think the worst thing that we could do would be deliver data that had question marks with it. We need to give you the best data that we can.
And I like that your focus is on the accuracy. And I actually applaud you for sticking to not giving us another date that might be squishy. We've had enough dates that slipped and changed and such. So I don't blame you at all for keeping to it. All right. So Christy, I want you to tell us, are we able, I'm going to say that we're recording this. We will make the recording available. Christy will correct me if I'm wrong about that.
Yes, it is being recorded and it will be hopefully available later today or tomorrow.
Okay, so I'm going to close this out. I really appreciate your work, Elizabeth Garner, to help NCSL get on top of what the heck is a census and why should we care throughout this year. I appreciate your work, Kathleen Stiles, to come here and talk about tough stuff in a way that's really digestible for the rest of us. And I think you've got a whole room full of people who are saying, we know you've had your, is it shoulder to the grindstone? Keep doing that, please. That's what we want from you all. So everybody, thank you. Stay safe. Stay in touch. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Wendy.